episode of Gautrain While It Matters. I'm Godfrey Mutizwa. Now, we all know the importance of infrastructure development. We want in particular today to focus on the impact that they are having in Gauteng and also talk about the province 5-year infrastructure project pipeline to revitalize the economy and the contribution of projects such as the Gautrain and the impact they have on economic growth. My guest for this conversation today is the Gauteng MEC for Infrastructure Development, Tasneem Motara. She joins us now. MEC, thank you for your time and good to see you. These are uncertain times.
Yes. Good afternoon and thanks for having me.
I think let's begin with the main theme that we want to tackle today, which is the issue of socio-economic development and the kind of strategies that you have in place to ensure that you actually have measurables that you get out of these infrastructure projects. Let's just begin perhaps by explaining to us, number one, the definition of it, and then secondly, let's talk about the strategy that you have.
Okay, really. So the definition of the socio-economic impact and the strategy aligned to that is really about how can we, especially now post-COVID or with the regulations easing up, how can we re-engineer and reignite the economy, given the fact that our socio-economic status has definitely changed from prior the pandemic to now. So you have a lot more pressures on jobs, on the creation or the ability to create jobs, but also just the ability to earn an income, start a business, etc. So really our strategy as a province and provincial wide has to look at what is it that is the state has as an ability to be able to catalyze and open up a lot of the economic opportunities that are there. We've identified that infrastructure amongst many one could be and definitely are one of the key drivers of that socioeconomic change and revitalization that we're looking for. To this end, we're looking at infrastructure of various kinds, and I know that we're going to speak about Gautrain and just really the rail and transportation space in the province. And over and above that, it would also mean just social infrastructure, like the continuation of building of schools, improving health facilities and the like.
Yeah, it's important, of course, that these things are measurable, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to know if you have had to rethink your socio-economic development programs in the light of COVID-19 and what impact it has had on it.
I think for us, it was not really about rethinking. I think we've really agreed on the approach, but it was about how do we accelerate it. Some of the things that we wanted to do maybe in year 4 and 5 actually need to be brought forward in year 2 and 3 for us to see a real impact. The situation is dire now. If we thought we were in a bad situation in January, we're even in a worse situation now. And so long-term planning, we really can't afford it.
Yeah, I guess the second part to my question is whether you have had to change some of the targets that you wanted to achieve in terms of your socio-economic development program, and whether COVID has forced you to reduce resources in one part to transfer them to another part.
Yeah, so COVID really forced us all to reprioritize. So reprioritization, looking at what we would like to do versus what we have to do, becomes very, very critical. And then what are the trade-offs we are willing to make? So, for instance, NHI is the policy of the leading party, the governing party, and for us to implement NHI, a core part of that is the infrastructure. That's responsible to be able to cushion and support the rollout of NHI. And of course, NHI would have been a very long-term plan, but a lot of what we had to do in terms of even just responding to COVID would have seen us bring forward a lot of plans in line with just the NHI deliverables. So it's about making those delicate trade-offs, but making sure that reprioritization in the wake of what the pandemic has done to the economy.
Yeah, so I and a number of journalists were part of the conversation that the president had with the country maybe a month or a couple of months ago, where he talked about the importance of infrastructure and its role in trying to regrow the economy and get the economy to move again. And the emphasis, as you will recall, was that infrastructure is going to lead us out of this. And my question to you is, in Gauteng, I would imagine there would be a large chunk of that program that the government is targeting in terms of projects. Can we talk about those, please?
Yes, almost definitely. So we have concluded what we call the 5-year project pipeline. And I think there was an opportunity just before the lockdown. We were able to share it with partners in the private and as well as the public space. So we've consolidated a 5-year project pipeline. So really, what does that do? So it gives confidence to the private sector to be able to see what are the plans of government. Secondly, it also gives confidence to investors who want to really invest, and then they're able then to see what are your future plans. So we're not really planning sort of a knee-jerk reaction way. And then what we've done is packaged a lot of the projects that the fiscus would not be able to fund and would need private partnership to be able to fund. But also we've been able to demonstrate what government, and in this instance, provincial government in Gauteng, will be putting down as our own investment. So, of course, to attract investment, government has got to be able to show what is it that they are putting from their side. So we've been able to say that over the next 5 years, we are confident that we're going to put 60 billion towards the investment of infrastructure in the province. Included in that, of course, is a lot of social infrastructure in the main, but also we've wanted to lean on the maintenance of our infrastructure. And of course, because we've got historical challenges, yes, we could go into the details of why we've not budgeted adequately and accurately for maintenance, but it's something that we've got to do. So we've skewed a lot of it towards maintenance from our own budget, but we've got a fairly comprehensive view of what it is that will be rolled out in the province in the next 5 years.
Yeah, you know what the naysayers will say, of course, the ANC is very good at talking. It's all talk, talk, talk. It has been talk since 1994. I wanted to talk about timeframes in terms of which some of the key projects that you are looking at are being planned, and also whether you have seen any movement since that symposium that we had and where we are today.
Yes, so just from the top of my head, I can tell you about the 10 hospitals that we are going to refurbish and just upgrade them. Some of them we were able to upgrade using the COVID response. So the 10 hospitals out of 32 hospitals have been identified as priority hospitals. We're starting with the ones out in the West Rand, particularly. So those are 4 hospitals. They are due to start at any given moment. They've gone through the public bidding process already. The next are the hospitals in Tshwane. Those have been identified as priority. So, but also what we were able to do with the reprioritization and the alignment of what COVID had forced us to do, and also just to readjust our 5-year pipeline, we were able to then merge the two, the 5-year plans in the health infrastructure projects, and then say, okay, we had, for instance, a long-term plan for the upgrade of Dr. George Mukhari Hospital, as an example. A lot of that work we were able to do now in the past 3 to 4 months. By the end of October, we would have handed over the hospital beds in the facility, and then with an additional 300 beds using alternative building technology. So we've got the 32 hospitals in the province. We're starting with the 10. Some of them have also been addressed now in the COVID process. The others is then, of course, the rapid rail integrated network extensions. And I know that's a mouthful, but everybody understands them to be the Gautrain expansion. And of course, I think what we are happy about, and it's also something that the president would have spoken about, is National Treasury's appetite now to approve triple Ps. So we have, for instance, found that in the past, Treasury would have been a bit reluctant to approve triple Ps, and that's the public-private partnership model of financing key government infrastructure. But because the reality is that the fiscus can't fund all of these, we've got to look at the private sector to be able to partner with us.
Yeah.
Particularly in the province, we're looking at the Kopanong project that's also on its way to closure in terms of the request for proposals in line with the triple P process, and that's going to see the 15 buildings in the provincial of provincial government in the CBD being completely overhauled, revamped, and that's going to give the CBD, the biggest CBD, which is the Johannesburg CBD, just a new lifeblood really for the next 30 to 50 years in terms of investment, but also just in terms of the changing demographic in the CBD. It's no longer the central business district that we know and we grew up knowing.
Yeah.
It's also changed to accommodate students. It's also changed to accommodate housing needs, and working with the municipality, we're able to direct those changes and look at bringing in private funders with very good deep pockets, but who are able to also share the risk with provincial government to be able to capitalize a lot of these economic opportunities.
Absolutely. MEC, you don't know how happy you are making me, because you know what they say when, in fact, I see it when I travel as well around the continent. If you want to see how well a country is doing, check its hospitals and see how it treats its people. In many cases, what you see is dilapidated infrastructure, and it would be really, really amazing if we're able to see those 10 hospitals that you say are going to be transformed out of this. We must, of course, talk about the elephant in the room, MEC. I mean, we have seen what has happened within the health sector for the PPEs program, the corruption that is followed that program. And people are going to say, oh, with infrastructure, you know, the amounts that you're talking about with PPEs is going to be small change. We're talking billions and billions of rand. Let's talk about your strategy to tackle, in particular, or prevent the emergence or perception of corruption within this program in order to get the buy-in that you require from citizens.
Yes, look, I think we are in a very precarious position because perception does play a big role in what the public sees as what government is doing. The provincial government has introduced a lot of measures to be able to improve on that perception and ultimately improving on the reality. So, for instance, the open tender system. Of course, in an emergency, we don't make use of the normal procurement processes. There are a lot of deviations, which are allowed for in law.
Sure.
But I think importantly is that with the rollout of the 5-year infrastructure program, we've got to be able to be very meticulous in terms of adhering to the law. We've got to not work alone as a provincial department, or any provincial department can't afford to work alone. So for instance, on Kopanong, we work very, very closely with the municipality as well as National Treasury and Provincial Treasury to make sure that the checks and balances are there all the time. We've even begun to speak more frequently to the Auditor General, just to make sure that we are on the right path, that we are making sure that we're crossing the T's, dotting the I's, because the problem is that you can go out on a very aggressive procurement process and a procurement strategy, but what happens post almost just dilutes what you want to do in terms of economic investment and injections.
Yeah.
For instance, with us, just as the Department of Infrastructure, we were able to, through the process, appoint just over 52 different companies to be able to assist us with the response towards COVID, and adhering to the Treasury regulations, making sure that the Auditor General is happy with our processes, because I think the public want to know that the process was clean and above board and open for anybody to scrutinize and be accepted. I think we've got to just accept that the ailing economy doesn't help our situation either. Yeah. There are companies who definitely want to do business with the state and who should do business with the state because they qualify to do so, and they qualify to do so because they qualify to do so on merit, not because they have connections or they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that the difficulty is that the private sector says, look, we've got capacity, we can do this work. But when you bring people who are really not in business or don't know how to do this work, it really says a lot about just government processes.
Yeah.
So as far as possible, we're not going to enter into an emergency process with any of these procurement. That means that we've got to have planning in place, human resource capacity to be able to achieve those targets. And I know that the Department of Transport is working extensively to be able to put those in place, as the Department of Infrastructure as well, making sure that human resource capacity is beefed up, but also just being able to make sure that you plan end to end, from the procurement process right down to handover, to
Yeah.
make sure that your process is clean. Anybody who feels hard done by can come in, understand why it was that their bid didn't
Yeah.
make the cut as opposed to person X. I think those things are very important for the private sector.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right that perceptions play a large part in some of the tiring that you see of all government work by people who sit outside. We tend to forget, of course, that the Gautrain itself was a partnership between the state and the private sector. It is a shining example of what can be done when people go about these things and do them properly. So I want to take you back to the Gautrain and the expansion program that you spoke about. We are all waiting on tender hooks. You don't need to sell the Gautrain to me. I'm a big disciple. My question is, what's keeping you from moving even faster than you are on that expansion program, and where are we in terms of that?
So in terms of where we are with we've done all the necessary in terms of getting the approvals from Treasury. So like I said, because it's a typical triple P, private public partnership that must go through the Treasury processes, it's also got a lot. So you've got to give, for instance, Treasury alternatives, different alternatives. It's got to include a whole lot of environmental screening as an example. So you've got to look at conservation status, whether your ecosystem is going to be threatened, what happens to municipalities. You've got to go through extensive public participation. And I know that on the Gautrain, at least there, we have a lot of buy-in from the public because it has big uptake. We've also got to go through a whole lot um, of processes that are legislated, but that have to, and for compliance sake. So any part of the process that you miss is that then just can throw out the entire process. And we don't want to have that. We don't want to like get to the end and then get somebody who says, oh, but you didn't do X, Y, Z in the process, start again. That's going to put us back. So we're really very, very meticulous. We're now just on the process of the extension in terms of the routes, where we are. So the route process, I know, would have gone through various changes. What we wanted to have as an extension, what came back, had to also go back to say, no, the problem is that we want to integrate the network with and have really a holistic integrated public transport system. So that's where we are now. And I think the next steps for the project is to be able to conclude all of those processes between ourselves and the different stakeholders, the different to report to the legislative and the regulatory bodies that need those reports for funding, especially National Treasury.
Yeah.
And then we'll get, once we get the final approval, gazette the route for the phase 1 extension. We can then go on and go ahead. I don't want to put my head on the block and say how many days it's going to take, but we are quite far in terms of that process. So, and like I said, Treasury has come on board with the passion from the president, definitely, to say that triple Ps need to be approved, because there are private partners who say that they do have funding. Your approval process as government sometimes takes too long. If you take too long, we'll shift our money elsewhere where we have projects that are ready. And Treasury has definitely come on board to say, okay, let's look at your triple P proposals, your public-private proposals, and let's look at what can be approved from Treasury side so that we can get them going.
Absolutely, and I can imagine the public will say, take your time as much as you can, MEC, as long as you make sure the process is clean. But at the same time, we want those trains yesterday, so you can't really win, can you?
No, but I guess that's in the nature of our business.
It is. That's why you get elected. That's why you are public servants. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the appetite that you have been able to gather, if you have indeed been able to talk to any of the private sector players that potentially would be partners in these processes. Have you seen any appetite from them? And you know, in these big projects, and also just in terms of the person that you're dealing with, you see their interest, obviously the expression of interest, but it's also what they charge you in terms of risk. You will see how happy they are to partner with you. What are you seeing in terms of interest?
Look, each project, depending on the return on investment, would attract the necessary interest from our private partners.
Right.
So we've gone through, so what we do is really package a proposal for the private sector and present it to them, tell them, look, this is the financial benefits, this is the contribution to the GDP that you will see. So for instance, just on the phase one, which is what we were speaking about on the Gautrain extension, for the next 20 years, you're looking at 113 billion rand in worth of financial benefits across the board. So that's just it's materials, it's manpower, it's job creation, and that sort of thing. We're looking at 110 billion rand GDP contribution. That's also just over the next 20 years. Just for the GDP of Gauteng, we're looking at a 78 billion rand contribution just on our internal GDP. You're looking at the benefits of job creation for the next 20 years. We're looking at just over 320,000 for 20 years. And so those are some of the numbers that we give investors. They do, of course, some would be very aggressive and go for high value projects such as the Gautrain. Of course, we've been able to look at the first Gautrain rollout, and of course, there's valuable lessons that we've learned. You would remember that with the Gautrain, the Gautrain as we have now, we had to import a lot of expertise, from jobs to professionals to a lot of expertise had to be imported. We're not at that phase now, no longer. We can really roll this out with the expertise available in the country. So if you have to quantify it, I think we can quantify it per project. Yeah. Projects that we think these definitely need private partnerships. And the private sector is definitely, if they can see value for money and the return on their investment quite clearly with no sort of gray areas, and if you're able to even respond to questions that they have, yeah, you find that the private sector is willing to invest. I mean, anybody wants to, those in the private sector, they live to invest their money to get a return. Yeah. And if you can demonstrate that as government, that they will definitely receive a return, and demonstrate it in rands and cents, and how it's going to affect their bottom line, they're fairly happy to partner with us.
Yeah, and a key consideration in these projects, of course, is sustainability, the ability to ensure that post their construction, they don't become the proverbial white elephants, and you are able to generate sustainable returns on them to the extent that they are able to be kept in operation. What measures are you taking to ensure these will be obtained as you implement these projects?
Yeah, so for us, I think that's where we make the decision of what to take out to the market, to the private sector, yeah, for partnerships, as opposed to funding them from the fiscus. So for us as government, the social infrastructure remains our responsibility. And of course, you would know that some schools have a lifeline, and then communities change and we've got to close a school. So you wouldn't want to have that type of a partnership with the private sector, unless, of course, for instance, you're rolling out schools of specialization, or schools that are linked to a private sector, or to a particular private sector. So the social infrastructure will still keep those, yeah, as part of our investment book, because of course for us it's about the social benefits that you can't necessarily count in terms of rands and cents, but you can count in terms of social benefit, just human abilities and human improvement, the life of human beings. And then there are others that are for social benefit, definitely, but have a direct impact on the bottom line of investors. Gautrain is one of them. The Kopanong precinct project, which I spoke about earlier on, yes, is also one of them, where we're giving 15 buildings as in a phased approach that is clustered to the private sector to really own for 30 years. I mean, that's quite a lucrative deal, as opposed to building a clinic that you've got to really fund out of your pocket in terms of maintenance and even the construction thereof. So we look at those and then decide which ones we take to the private sector. There are going to be some social infrastructure projects that we will also take out to the private sector. For instance, just looking at the health space, because there's a lot of private players in the health space, to be able to say that, look, if you invest, this is your return on investment in terms of what you could benefit out of it. But again, knowing that, of course, the state subsidizes health in South Africa to a large, almost 100%.
Absolutely. It's key, of course, that we build these things, but what is even more important is what you spoke about earlier when we started this interview, where you spoke about the amounts that are being set aside for the maintenance of these projects. Just give us the planning around that and your ability to get the support that you require from Treasury to be able to maintain these facilities, because often we know they are happy to pay, but once they have paid, to then come back and say, we need more money for that building to be maintained, sometimes that conversation falls on deaf ears.
Yes, so I think, unfortunately, which is it's something that we've done incorrectly in South Africa, was that we would have funded infrastructure projects in terms of greenfields investments. However, when a decision must be made about where do you take money from and move it from A to B, you ultimately move money earmarked for maintenance to another pressing need. What this does is that it devalues the investment that you would have made on a greenfields project. And then when you actually have to reinvest, you're reinvesting into the project as if starting from ground zero. And then, of course, a lot also has to do with the internal ability of each department to be able just to manage its own internal finances. So, for instance, I mean, if we think about the Department of Health, for the larger part of the last administration, the Department of Health actually took away money from infrastructure to deal with their accruals. A necessary decision. I mean, they had to make sure that they deal with accruals because that has a negative impact on the department's ability to perform. But what it does at the back end is that it takes away from what you could be investing in infrastructure. So when we look at triple Ps and when we're looking at public-private partnerships and to get Treasury approval, there's actually a big part of it that speaks to the investment and the costs for maintenance over the concession period. So you've got to build those costs in, and only then really will Treasury approve it. I think we've got to get to a point, even as a state as a whole, to say that there are non-negotiables that we've got to enter into where we can't move money. So you can't really shift. You shouldn't be shifting money from maintenance to deal with accruals. I think that's just bad planning. I think it's also just it's just unfortunately things that we've also been inherited historically from past performances of departments. But fortunately, the Department of Health has been able to deal with many of their accruals, and we don't foresee them being forced into a decision where they say, look, we can't maintain anything anymore. We've got to shift money from infrastructure in terms of maintenance to another pressing need.
All the best, MEC, in that battle. We wish you well. And I wanted to say to you, yes, of course, there is social distancing in place now. But in our studio, I can tell you we are okay in terms of our physical distancing. So don't be shy in popping up into the studio. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure now with level 2 we can. I look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Gauteng MEC for Infrastructure Development, Tasneem Motara, joining us for this edition of the Gautrain, Why It Matters, where we speak about the signature project that has absolutely transformed Gauteng into a modern day province, as well as, of course, the city of Johannesburg and Pretoria. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, goodbye.